Hi there folks, this is Tony for A Minute to Midnight, and what I want to do today is just make a short introduction video, and then I will be playing another video that I recorded some time ago which I think is important, and adding it into this video. So please remember that A Minute to Midnight's run 100% by donations. If anyone's able to donate, that's always much appreciated. It's been pretty slow this year so far. So if you can help us by donating at aminutetomidnight.com, that's always much appreciated. And please make sure you subscribe to us at aminutetomidnight.com, and also our YouTube channel and Apple Podcast channel and so forth. And like and share our videos is always much appreciated as well. So what we have is a situation at the moment, obviously a Middle East war, and the ramifications of that at the moment are going all around the globe. It's affecting all of us in one way or another, and people are wondering where it is going to end. Just briefly, Michael Snyder, he wrote an article at End of the American Dream. The article is titled "Trapped in an Apocalyptic War in the Middle East with No Easy Way Out. We are locked in a steel cage with Iran and nobody can seem to find the key. But if we don't find a way out, the global economy is going to collapse, global food production is going to decline precipitously, and it is likely just a matter of time before someone uses weapons that should never be used under any circumstances." President Trump sent Iran a 15-point plan to end the war this week, but the Iranians just laughed at it. The Iranians have no intention of ending this war until its own conditions are met. So there will be no negotiated settlement, no matter how much the Trump administration may want one. One Iranian spokesman is mocking us by suggesting that US officials are simply negotiating with themselves. The Iranians are absolutely convinced they are going to win, and they have just released a video that depicts the Statue of Liberty being blown up by an Iranian missile. The US is trapped in this war as long as Iran continues to paralyze traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, and as long as Iran continues to attack our allies in the region. So if the US and Israel want to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, either they will have to give the Iranians everything they're asking for, conduct a full-blown ground invasion to overthrow the regime, or use nuclear weapons, which should be unthinkable. At this stage, all of those options are completely unacceptable to the Trump administration. The Iranians understand that they are the ones with the leverage now, and they're going to be ruthless. The US and Israel will continue to pummel Iran from the air, but that won't change the state of play. Approximately 93 million people live in Iran, and the regime has had 47 years to deeply embed itself in every element of Iranian society. Trying to get rid of it now will be exceedingly tough, but allowing it to block the traffic through the Strait of Hormuz is intolerable, because that will crash the global economy. We're caught between a rock and a hard place, and our choices are only going to get even more difficult in the days ahead. I could cover a lot more to do with the war, but what I'm seeing is some people going, this was all predicted by Albert Pike, a 3 World Wars letter written in 1871. So what I want to do here in this video is prove that I don't believe there ever was a 3 World Wars letter between Albert Pike and Giuseppe Mazzini. And it is based on a video and an article that I did several years ago, which are just as relevant today as when I did them. So because of the proliferation of people saying, this is all predicted in Albert Pike's 3 World Wars letter, I want to now just replay that video that I did several years ago, which I say is just as relevant now, and just to, I think, lay to bed the fact that I don't believe there ever was a 3 World Wars letter written by Albert Pike. Back in July of 2017, I wrote an article and published it on the aminutetomidnight.com website. The article was titled "Albert Pike's 3 World Wars, Fact or Fake?" I've always intended to make a video on that article and that topic, but it's taken me till now to actually do it. But I think it's important because I still quite often get people quoting the supposed Albert Pike's 3 World Wars letter and I want to say that I had a pretty good close look at it back in 2017, because until that point I probably thought it was true. However, when I researched it more deeply, I came to the conclusion that I don't believe there was ever a Three World Wars letter. There's no proof that Albert Pike ever actually wrote the letter on the Three World Wars that he supposedly sent to Giuseppe Mazzini in 1871. As far as I know, no copy of that supposed letter actually exists. Before William Guy Carr's book from 1958 came out and talked of it, no one had ever heard of it. Never heard of that letter until that point. Albert Pike and Mazzini were certainly Luciferians, but their alleged communications around Three World Wars is a totally different story. Edith Starr Miller wrote a book called Occult Theocracy in 1933, which is a very thorough guide to secret societies, and it makes no mention of that letter, even though she talks of alleged interaction between Karl Marx, Albert Pike and Giuseppe Mazzini. But you'd think that if such a letter existed, she would have mentioned it then. She does mention other supposed letters between Pike and Mazzini, but even those I'm dubious of. So in this video, I'd just like to briefly examine some of the evidence that I believe shows that there was no letter. There's more information in the article that I've written on aminutetomidnight.com titled Albert Pike's Three World Wars, Fact or Fake? And if you're interested in more information, you'd do well to actually read that article. One of the things that I believe is very important when exposing the Luciferian conspiracy that I believe runs through human history, it's important to separate fact from fiction. It appears to me that at least a large portion of the supposed Three World Wars letter from Pike is simply a continuation of a hoax begun by Leo Taxil in the 1890s. And I think it's important that we realise this instead of parroting Pike's Three World Wars letter as if it's fact. So while I do have serious doubts about the authenticity of Pike's Three World Wars letter, I'm not coming out in support of Freemasonry, the Scottish Rite, or any Masonic rite. And I do believe Albert Pike was a Luciferian, as I mentioned earlier. Nevertheless, in order to be honest, if there's really no evidence for that letter, then we shouldn't be quoting it as if there is evidence for it. And so I will read from Guy Carr's book, Pawns in the Game. According to this quote, Pike's plan was as simple as it has proved effective. He required that communism, Nazism, political Zionism and other international movements be organised and used to foment the three global wars and three major revolutions. The First World War was to be fought so as to enable the Illuminati to overthrow the powers of the Tsars in Russia and turn that country into the stronghold of atheistic communism. The differences stirred up by the agentur of the Illuminati between the British and German empires were to be used to foment this war. After the war ended, communism was to be built up and used to destroy other governments and weaken religions. World War II was to be fomented by using the differences between fascists and Zionists. This war was to be fought so that Nazism would be destroyed and the power of political Zionism increased so that the sovereign state of Israel could be established in Palestine. During World War II, international communism was to be built up until it equaled in strength that of united Christendom. At this point, it was to be contained and kept in check until required in the final social cataclysm. Can any informed person deny Roosevelt and Churchill did not put this policy into effect? Now folks, don't forget that when William Guy Carr wrote this book, World Wars I and II had already been fought, the State of Israel was already in existence, and the surrounding Arab Muslim nations had already tried to destroy Israel So Guy Carr's talking about stuff that had already happened and then saying that Pike had predicted it in a letter to Mazzini. I'll carry on. World War III is to be fomented by using the differences the agentur of the Illuminati stir up between political Zionists and the leaders of the Muslim world. The war is to be directed in such a manner that Islam, the Arab world including Mohammedanism, and political Zionism, including the State of Israel, will destroy themselves, while at the same time the remaining nations, once more divided against each other on this issue, will be forced to fight themselves into a state of complete exhaustion, physically, mentally, spiritually, and economically. Skipping a bit. On 15th of August 1871, Pike told Mazzini that after World War III is ended, those who aspire to undisputed world domination will provoke the greatest social cataclysm the world has ever known. We quote his own written words taken from the letter catalogued in the British Museum Library, London, England. And so now William Guy Carr quotes from the alleged letter between Albert Pike and Giuseppe Mazzini. So this is directly, supposedly, quoted from that letter. We shall unleash the nihilists and atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm, which in all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of slavery, and of most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere the citizens obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitude disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will be from that moment without compass, direction, anxious for an ideal but without knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer brought finally out in the public view, a manifestation which will result from the general reactionary movement which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time. That's quoted from William Guy Carr, Pawns in the Game, pages 10 and 11. And by the way, I do believe that proponents of the New World Order actually do want to bring Luciferianism to the fore at the end, after conflicts and so on. But that's also been espoused in writings by Madame Blavatsky and Alice A. Bailey, among others, which predated also Guy Carr's 1958 book. Okay, now as far as the manuscript supposedly being catalogued in the British Museum Library, later on, William Guy Carr, wrote that the letter was not catalogued in the British Museum Library. The keeper of manuscripts recently informed the author that this letter is not catalogued in the British Museum Library. It seems strange that a man of Cardinal Rodriguez's knowledge should have said that it was in 1925. That's William Guy Carr's Satan, Prince of this World, page 22. And that was published after William Guy Carr's death. And there are those that say, well, the letter was taken away or hidden by the Illuminati and that's why it disappeared. But I want to show you that that doesn't add up either, that what was catalogued in the British Library was not actually the letter at all. I want to give a heads up that another great article on this topic was written by a researcher named Terry Mallinson, and it can be found at conspiracyarchive.com. Albert Pike to Mazzini, August 15th, 1871, Three World Wars. I recommend that article. You can also find that linked, by the way, in the A Minute to Midnight article. So, Terry Mallinson, who was a great researcher on all things of the early Illuminati, he uncovers the supposed book by Cardinal Rodriguez to pin down further what this actual manuscript supposedly in the British Museum was. I'll quote from a bit from that book by Cardinal Rodriguez, which was titled The Mystery of Freemasonry Unveiled. The cause in the work of Monsignor Jewin concerning the protocols and the work of Witchell are given the names of all the Jews who have been in government of the Soviet, and thus it is shown that the Jews are realizing their plan, for which they counted on Masonry as a blind and servile instrument. The other indication of the participation of Masonry in the revolution and the present upheaval in Russia is a letter in Le Diable au 26e Siècle 1896, attributed to Albert Pike, Sovereign Pontiff of Universal Masonry, assisted by 10 ancients of the Grand Lodge of the Supreme Orient of Charleston, to the very illustrious Joseph Mazzini, dated August 15th, 1871. There's a whole lot more in that particular passage, which you can find quoted on Terry Mallinson's website. And Terry goes on to say he was pleased with the discovery that Cardinal Rodriguez provided adequate citation for further investigation. Some of the new information gleaned include the fact that Carr quoted directly from Rodriguez's meagre one-paragraph excerpt. The latter mentioned nothing about a prediction of 3 world wars, and Carr was confused about exactly what was catalogued in the British Museum. Furthermore, it appears that Cardinal Rodriguez was alluding to Le Diable 26e Siècle as its publication being catalogued at the museum, not the letter itself. Now, at any rate, Mallinson says, Le Diable, that magazine, The Devil in the 19th Century, that's the English translation of it, is the source of the alleged letter. Now, I'm going to spare a lot of the details here because otherwise this video would be hours long, but I'm recommending that you find and fill in the gaps by reading the A Minute to Midnight article and also Terry Mallinson's article. I will just fill in a few sections of it, an outline basically. You will find that the section about the nihilists and the atheists could be found in a publication called The Cause in 1920, a similar quote from Rodriguez's book in 1957, and then William Guy Carr's book in 1958. But the origin of most of this goes back to the book, which I'll just give you the English name rather than the French name again, The Devil in the 19th Century by Dr. Taxil, Volume 2, Chapter 27, pages 594 to 606. And you will find this whole thing transcribed in Mallinson's article, The Plan of the Secret Chiefs. So this is where the supposed letter originated from. Still no mention of 3 world wars, by the way, just a bunch of other stuff that has been turned into the 3 world wars reference. First mentioned in 1958 by William Guy Carr. Now this whole letter is way too long for me to read, but you can find it on Terry's site. But I'll just read a bit of Terry's summary. Exactly what William Guy Carr was trying to pull, I'll never know. If you've bared it until the end, perhaps you're disappointed to have found nothing about a prediction of 3 world wars, communism, Nazism, and Zionist Illuminati, or anything of the sort. A search through the entire book, utilizing relevant word combinations, turns up nothing either. Instead, what it truly represents is the scurrilous fantasies and militant anti-Catholicism of its author, the impostor Leo Taxil, aka Dr. Taxil, who profited handsomely while having a million laughs at the expense of both Christians and Masons, who confessed that his entire corpus of anti-Masonic works spanning 12 years and representing thousands of pages, including the translated excerpt above, were a complete and utter fraud, a colossal yet ridiculously farcical hoax. It is enough, having shown that the so-called Pike-Mazzini letter came from the Taxil hoax, and to have provided a full translation of it. However, if the reader is so inclined, there are plenty of resources to become familiar with all the facets of Leo Taxil's case, and in the A Minute to Midnight article I have included a bunch more quotes and documentation on various aspects of the Albert Pike letters, the alleged statements, and the Taxil hoax, including Taxil's confession, which I have there on the website, and various other spurious things linked to the whole Taxil fraud, basically. I won't go into them all here because there's just too much, but you can, if you really want to investigate it further. There are a lot of these things on both the A Minute to Midnight article and also Terry Mallinson's article, which I believe leave no doubt that the whole 3 World Wars letter goes back to the Taxil hoax. But just to basically and briefly sum up, the only real references that are of Pike and Mazzini supposedly communicating through letters go back to the works of Leo Taxil in the 1800s, which he admitted to be hoaxes. There was no actual mention of world wars. However, the mention of world wars didn't come until much later and were embellished by various people, chief of which was William Guy Carr in 1958. Having said that though, Albert Pike was definitely a wicked Luciferian, Giuseppe Mazzini as well. It is possible that they knew each other and had some interaction, though there's no proof of that. It seems more likely that they didn't know each other and that all the connection between the two of them has originated from the fantasies of Dr. Batil, aka Leo Taxil, whose real name was actually Marie Joseph Gabriel Antoine Jogard Pages, who lived from 1854 to 1907, was a French writer and journalist and famous hoaxer. Freemasonry, I would never recommend anyone become involved in Freemasonry and so on, but that's not the purpose of this particular video. I've done a whole lot of other videos exposing Freemasonry and so on. But I just wanted to point out that don't believe people's quoting the 3 World Wars letter as having been written by Albert Pike, because I don't believe it ever was. I don't believe there were any references to 3 World Wars until after World War I and II had already happened, and that William Guy Carr and his book was pretty much the instigator of turning Taxil's hoax of the links between Pike and Mazzini further into a 3 World Wars scenario that supposedly pits Zionists against Muslims, and that may well happen. It may be that that is what the secret societies want and that they use that as part of a scenario for World War III. However, that was not predicted in 1871 by Albert Pike. I just want to finish with a small section quoted from Leo Taxil, published in 1906. The jolly evenings I spent with my fellow authors hatching out new plots, new unheard of perversions of truth and logic, each trying to outdo the other in organised mystification. I thought I'd kill myself laughing at some of the things proposed, but everything went. There is no limit to human stupidity. It should probably be noted though that just like Adam Weishaupt, who founded the Illuminati in 1776, was a supposed disillusioned ex-Jesuit, which there is some doubt whether he still had ties to the Jesuits. Well, Leo Taxil, or Leo Taxil perhaps it should really be pronounced, was also placed in a Jesuit seminary as a child. He also supposedly became disillusioned with the Catholic faith. It does leave me wondering if it is possible that Taxil was an Illuminati agent who exposed some truth in the midst of his hoax, but became a liability to them. Taxil died in 1907, a year after he confessed his entire hoax. It's only speculation, who knows? But he did make both Catholics and Masons look bad. Also, I think it's important that people realise that there are a lot of supposed Albert Pike quotes that lead back to Taxil, as well as the 3 World Wars one. I don't think we do ourselves any favours by using supposed quotes purported to be Albert Pike, which can actually really be attributed to Taxil. Stick to the ones that we know to be genuine, and on the A Minute to Midnight article I've shown you which ones can be trusted and which ones can't. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it the thumbs up and like it. God bless, and we'll catch you again soon with more videos.